The morning they fired me, the office smelled like burnt espresso and fake confidence. It was one of those days where the air felt too clean, too rehearsed, like everyone already knew something I didn't. The HR manager's heels clicked across the floor with military precision, and when she stopped at my desk, she didn't have to say a word. The white envelope in her hand said everything. Restructuring, she whispered, like that word could soften the blow of betrayal. I sat there, staring at the company logo glowing faintly on my laptop screen. The same screen I'd spent 4 years guarding like a fortress. I was the SOC 2 officer. My job was to make sure our company could be trusted. Every audit, every log, every access request had my fingerprint on it. In a business built on data, trust is currency, and I was the mint. But that morning, they decided I was no longer aligned with the company's direction. That's what the memo said. What it really meant. I'd asked one question too many. 3 weeks from that day, our CEO was set to close a $358 million acquisition deal, a sale that would make headlines across the tech and finance world. Everyone in that building believed it was done, dusted, sealed. Everyone except me. Because buried inside our systems, beneath all the polished compliance reports and glossy investor decks, there was something that didn't add up. Something no one wanted to talk about. And when I tried to bring it up, I suddenly became a distraction. Within 48 hours, I was out. They thought getting rid of me would make the deal smoother. They were wrong. Because in the world of SOC 2, the truth doesn't disappear when you delete an employee. It lives in audit trails, immutable logs, and systems that never forget. I remember walking out with my box of things, a coffee mug, a few files, and a USB drive I'd quietly encrypted weeks earlier. No one looked me in the eye. No one said goodbye. But I could feel their relief as I left, like they'd finally shut down a problem. The irony? That problem was the only thing keeping their $358 million dream intact. That night, I sat in my apartment with nothing but silence and the faint buzz of my external drive spinning up beside me. I opened the audit reports I'd saved, not because I planned revenge, but because I needed to know if I was right. And when I saw the missing logs, the sudden disappearance of key access entries from our identity proxy, my stomach dropped. It wasn't an error. It was deliberate, the kind of deliberate that could blow up an entire deal. I didn't know it yet, but that single discovery would trigger a chain of events that would unravel everything they'd built. By the time the truth surfaced, the $358 million sale would be dead, the board fractured, and the people who'd fired me would be scrambling to explain how trust itself had been deleted from their systems. They fired the wrong person. And soon, the world would know exactly how much that mistake cost them. When I first joined the company, it was nothing but a handful of engineers, a rented office space, and a dream that data security could be turned into profit. They called it Velocity Analytics. The name sounded sleek, futuristic, like we were building rockets out of code. But behind the branding there was chaos. Startups always start that way. Everyone doing everything. No rules, no process, no sleep. That's where I came in. I was hired to get us compliant. What they really meant was, make us look legitimate enough to win enterprise clients. I'd been through SOC 2 audits before, the kind that make grown executives tremble over access controls and policy documents. So I built everything from scratch: encryption standards, access logs, risk assessments, employee training, and little by little, I became the invisible heartbeat of the company. When clients asked, "Can we trust you with our data?" it was my name behind the reports that said yes. When investors wanted reassurance, I was the one who presented the clean audit results. The CEO, Mark Turner, loved to call me his compliance guardian. But as the company grew, his tone changed. The bigger we got, the more impatient he became. "Speed is everything," he'd say. "Audit later," I'd remind him. "Trust isn't a checkbox." "Mark, it's a trail." He'd smile, nod, then do the exact opposite. By year 4, we had over 200 employees, major corporate clients, and a looming acquisition offer from a global tech giant. The number on the term sheet, $358 million, was more than any of us ever imagined. Everyone was celebrating before the ink dried. Champagne appeared in the fridge. The CFO started pricing beach houses, and HR whispered about life-changing bonuses. But I saw the cracks. Underneath the celebration, there were shortcuts. Tiny ones at first, like delayed patch updates or ignored access reviews. Then came bigger ones. The CTO, a sharp but reckless man named Ethan, began streamlining our system permissions to meet aggressive deadlines. It made development faster, but it also opened silent backdoors. I documented everything, every deviation, every risk, every policy violation swept under the rug, because I knew, in this world, paper trails were more powerful than opinions. When the buyer's auditors came in, they didn't look at our revenue charts or PR slides. They looked at me, at my reports, at the evidence that proved our security posture wasn't a story. It was real. And for a while, I delivered exactly what they needed. Flawless results. Then one night, I noticed something that shouldn't have been possible. One of our identity logs, a central part of our SOC2 control, had gaps. Entire days missing, access entries erased as if no one had logged in or out during that time. That was impossible in a live system. When I asked Ethan about it, he brushed me off. "We're cleaning up old data sources," he said. "The auditors don't need that much noise." But it wasn't noise. Those logs contained privileged user activity, developers with admin access to client environments. Removing that data didn't just simplify reports. It destroyed evidence of system integrity. I raised it in a compliance review. Ethan smirked, called me overcautious, and the CEO told me to trust the team. That was the first time I realized trust in this company had become negotiable. Still, I kept quiet. I told myself it wasn't my fight, that my job was to advise, not to police. But a voice inside me whispered otherwise. What's the point of building trust if the people in charge are the ones breaking it? The closer the sale got, the more anxious I became. Every audit request from the buyer felt like a test I wasn't sure we could pass anymore. And when one of their compliance officers asked for historical access evidence, I felt my pulse spike, because I already knew the truth. That evidence didn't exist anymore, not completely, and in 3 weeks, the deal that was supposed to make us all rich might just come crashing down under the weight of its own lies. The tension started quietly, like a hum beneath the floorboards. The buyer's audit team, a group of calm, meticulous professionals from a firm called Crestline Security, began asking deeper questions. Not the usual checkboxes or policy confirmations. They wanted samples, historical evidence, traceability, and that's where the cracks widened. Each time they asked for proof, Ethan and his tech leads would delay, claiming data synchronization issues or access problems. I knew what that meant. The logs were incomplete. They couldn't provide the full trail, because too much had been tampered with. The first time I saw the buyer's lead auditor frown, I knew we were in trouble. His name was Daniel Chen, a man with the patience of a scientist and the instincts of a detective. He didn't miss details. One afternoon, he called me into a meeting, his tone quiet but firm. "Your SOC2 control map references Identity Proxy 3 as an active log source," he said, pointing at the document. "But in our evidence review, there's no record of that source in the last 3 months. Can you explain?" My throat tightened. Identity Proxy 3 was the log Ethan had purged. I hesitated, carefully choosing my words. "It should be active," I said. "If it's missing, something's wrong." Daniel nodded, eyes sharp. "Then we'll need to see the restoration logs and change history." Ethan's jaw tensed across the table. "We'll handle that internally," he cut in, voice calm, but with a warning edge. I met his eyes. That's when I saw it. Not fear, but arrogance. The kind that comes from believing no one will dare challenge you. That night, after everyone left, I went back to the office. The security lights flickered overhead, casting long shadows across the empty desks. I logged into our system and pulled up the change history for the proxy servers. The deletion entry was still there, time-stamped, tagged with an admin credential that didn't match any known user. Someone had created a ghost account, and that account had the authority to modify evidence sources. In SOC2 terms, That wasn't a risk. It was a catastrophe. The next morning, I brought it to the CEO. I expected panic, questions, immediate escalation. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You're overcomplicating this," he said. "The buyer doesn't care about technicalities. They want a clean report. We're giving them one." I stared at him, stunned. "Mark, if they discover this, the deal could fall apart. It's not just a technicality. It's falsified evidence." He smiled that CEO smile. Polished, practiced, and empty. "You're the compliance officer, not the negotiator. Let us handle the sale. You handle the paperwork." Something broke inside me then. All those late nights, those endless reports, the belief that integrity mattered. It all turned to ash in that one sentence. Still, I kept trying. I submitted a formal report to the board's audit committee. I even flagged it in our internal risk tracker. But before any of it could gain traction, the CTO called an emergency meeting. Effective immediately, Ethan announced. "All SOC2-related communications with the buyer will go through me. We need consistency." Consistency, a euphemism for control. I wasn't allowed to speak to the auditors again. My access to key systems was quietly revoked. Even my team started avoiding me. It was clear. I had been marked as the problem, but I wasn't done. Not yet. 2 nights later, while packing at my desk after another tense day, I got a text from Daniel Chen, the buyer's auditor. It said only 3 words. "Is something missing?" I stared at the message, my hands trembling. He knew. He could sense that the puzzle didn't fit. My reply was simple. Yes, but not by accident. That was the moment everything shifted. Because from that point on, Daniel didn't just audit us, he started investigating. His team requested an unscheduled walkthrough of our privileged access systems. They compared timestamp patterns and found subtle irregularities, login gaps that no automated system could naturally produce. Within days, the buyer's legal counsel got involved. The deal team demanded full transparency. Suddenly, Mark and Ethan were holding back-to-back calls, whispering behind glass doors. HR circulated new NDAs, and in the middle of that chaos, I was called into one final meeting. Ethan's expression was cold as steel. "We're restructuring," he said flatly. "Your role will be absorbed by the risk management team." I looked at him, the CEO, and the HR manager, 3 faces pretending this was routine. "You're firing me before the deal closes," I said. Mark didn't even blink. "You've done great work, but we need smoother operations going forward." I laughed. It wasn't anger anymore, just disbelief. "You're silencing the one person who can prove this company is lying to a $358 million buyer." No one spoke. The HR manager slid a severance packet across the table. That night, I walked out of that glass fortress for the last time, badge deactivated, reputation hanging by a thread. But I also carried something they didn't know about. A copy. A full, encrypted archive of every audit trail, every deleted log, every falsified timestamp, and a quiet promise to myself. If they wanted to bury the truth, I'd make sure it clawed its way back to daylight. The silence that follows betrayal is strange. It doesn't roar, it hums. Low, steady, unnerving, like the world keeps moving, but you're suddenly watching it from outside the glass. That's what it felt like after they fired me. For days, my phone barely buzzed. The colleagues who used to message me every hour were now ghosts. The compliance chat group removed me overnight. Even my access badge was deactivated before I reached the parking lot. It was surgical, the kind of clean erasure that only comes from fear. They wanted me forgotten before anyone could ask why I was gone. But the universe doesn't stay silent forever. 2 days later, I got an email, anonymous, encrypted. It contained a single attachment, an internal memo forwarded from someone inside the company. The subject line read, "SOC2 Incident Containment." I opened it, my pulse spiking. The memo was from Ethan, the CTO, sent to the entire leadership team. Following recent personnel changes, we've identified and corrected internal documentation inconsistencies. The SOC2 report remains compliant, and no customer impact has been detected. The buyer has been informed. Please refrain from direct communication with audit representatives unless cleared through legal. In other words, they'd erased me and rewritten the story. scrolled to the bottom and saw a chilling footnote. All materials previously owned by the former SOC2 officer are under review. Any external communication referencing their tenure should be approved. They weren't just silencing me. They were scrubbing me out of existence, rewriting the logs, replacing my name on every report I had built, every control I had verified. I leaned back in my chair, trembling. It wasn't just personal. This was deliberate falsification. And I still had the proof. But proof means nothing without timing. The buyer's deal was scheduled to close in 3 weeks. If I revealed too much, too early, they'd deny it, spin it, bury it under legal jargon. I needed to wait, to strike when the evidence mattered most. Meanwhile, rumors began circulating in the industry. I had friends in cybersecurity circles, and whispers reached me through encrypted chats. Hey, didn't you work at Velocity Analytics? I heard they're pushing their SOC2 fast track for the acquisition. Fast track. That word was poison. No legitimate audit is ever fast-tracked, not unless someone's hiding something. I dug deeper. Using credentials from a still-active remote backup account, one they apparently forgot to disable, I accessed the company's internal Confluence documentation. The moment I logged in, my stomach twisted. They'd uploaded a new SOC2 evidence folder, time-stamped after my termination. The documents were flawless, too flawless, every gap filled, every missing log restored, every timestamp adjusted to appear seamless. Except one thing, the font metadata didn't match. Someone had forged parts of the audit report. And in digital forensics, metadata is truth. You can hide content but not creation traces. That's when the betrayal cut even deeper, because it wasn't just the CTO or CEO anymore. I recognized another name in the edit history, Clara, my deputy, the one person I thought still had integrity. She'd signed off on the altered documents, likely under pressure. Her comment on the file said it all. Updated per leadership request. Please finalize before buyer review. That's when I realized how far this had gone. It wasn't a few rogue executives. It was the entire upper chain, united by greed, terrified of losing the sale. They'd rather falsify trust than earn it. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the screen, my reflection faint in the dark glass. I could have stayed quiet. I could have walked away, taken another job, let them get their payout. But something inside me refused. For years, I'd built my reputation on one belief. Trust isn't negotiable. If I let them sell lies wrapped in audits, everything I stood for would mean nothing. So I started building my case. Every email I'd sent, every log I'd verified, every anomaly report, I compiled them into an encrypted timeline. I matched timestamps to backup snapshots, built a full trace of when and how they altered data, and then I wrote a message. It wasn't to the CEO, or the CTO, or even to Clara. It was to Daniel Chen, the buyer's lead auditor, the man who had quietly seen through the cracks before. My message was short. The logs you're reviewing were modified post-termination. I can prove it. If you care about the truth, contact me. Off record. I hit send. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. For 2 days, nothing. Then, late one evening, a reply arrived. From a secure channel. Let's talk. Tomorrow. 7 p.m. Bring evidence. And just like that, the tide began to turn. The company thought they'd buried me. But what they didn't realize was that the audit trail they destroyed had already been backed up by the very person they tried to erase. The betrayal was complete. But so was my resolve. Because now, I wasn't just a fired employee. I was a ticking truth, waiting to detonate at the perfect moment. I never pictured revenge as fireworks. For me, it was spreadsheets, timestamps, and the slow, relentless pressure of a well-organized file. If they wanted to sell a story, I was going to sell the receipts that proved it was a lie. First, I tightened the evidence. I encrypted the archive into layers: raw logs, change history exports, email threads, and the forensic metadata showing the edits. Each file had a checksum, a creation note, and a short explanation. Crisp, unemotional, impossible to dismiss. No theatrics, just facts. Next, I built a timeline they couldn't ignore. When the proxy was altered, who authorized the ghost account, which reports were swapped after my departure, and how those changes aligned with investor calls and the buyer's requests. I mapped it to the deal calendar so every gap hit where it hurt, right before sign-off, when trust has the most value. I also thought about allies. Truth rarely survives in isolation. Daniel, the buyer's auditor, became my first partner. He believed in the craft of evidence. We agreed on protocol. He would validate what I provided off the record, then escalate internally if the proof held. I refused to be the lone loud voice. I wanted the buyer's own team to call the shots. Then I widened the net. I reached out to a small network of independent security journalists and a respected forensic consultant under strict embargo. Not to create noise, but to ensure impartial validation if things went dark. The idea was simple. If the company tried to gaslight or litigate, there would already be neutral experts who could confirm the technical truths. Timing mattered. I couldn't blow the whistle the day after my firing. They'd bury or backdate everything. So I waited until the buyer's audit had progressed enough that my evidence would force a pause, a point where rerunning controls would meaningfully delay the deal. The goal was not to destroy the company for sport. It was to make the buyer see that paying $358 million for a story, not a reality, was too risky. Finally, I prepared an exit vector for myself. If things escalated legally, I would release documents to the buyer's counsel and the independent consultant under a narrow, provable chain of custody. No leaks to tabloids, no theatrics, just calibrated pressure that left them two choices: fix the truth and renegotiate, or face the consequence of selling a fabricated assurance. I didn't relish revenge. I cultivated precision, and in that precision lay power, the kind that makes a $358 million handshake suddenly look like nothing more than a line in a ledger. When the audit report hit the inbox of our CEO, the subject line alone could have frozen time. Preliminary compliance review. Irregularities detected. Within hours, the boardroom was packed. No one spoke as they scrolled through the findings I'd prepared in secret. A 47-page bombshell that mapped the exact chain of falsified evidence, unauthorized data overrides, and compliance violations that tied back to Ethan and two board members who had quietly greenlit those shortcuts. Every timestamp, every log, every internal Slack message I'd archived under a hidden mirror account was now visible on the main screen. Their signatures were right there, approving data masking that violated federal SOC2 controls. The room went dead silent. Ethan's face drained of color. He leaned back, his jaw tightening as if trying to hold back the panic rising through his chest. The CEO, usually calm and diplomatic, looked like he'd just swallowed poison. This can't be real, he muttered, flipping through pages. It's all verifiable, I said calmly. Audit logs are immutable. Every digital trail you tried to erase was captured twice. One of the board members stood up. You're accusing us of fraud? I didn't blink. I'm showing you evidence that could send this company into federal litigation if disclosed during the sale process, and it's about to be disclosed because the acquiring firm requested the full unredacted audit yesterday. That moment, that exact second, was the real collapse. You could feel the $358 million deal dissolving in the air like smoke. Ethan slammed his hand on the table. You just destroyed the company. No, I said quietly. You did that the day you made compliance optional. Within 24 hours, the acquiring firm's legal team froze communications, citing material misrepresentation of data integrity. The sale, months in the making, evaporated overnight. Stockholders went into panic mode, and as the company scrambled to contain the fallout, I made one final move. I forwarded an anonymous packet, the same report, with time-stamped proof of internal cover-ups, to a well-known investigative cybersecurity journal. Within days, headlines hit, Cloud Fortress faked SOC2, compliance ahead of $358 million sale. The story exploded across LinkedIn, InfoSec newsrooms, and tech ethics forums. Inside the company, panic turned to chaos. Ethan was suspended pending investigation. The 2 board members resigned to focus on personal matters. And me? I didn't say a word publicly. I didn't post. I didn't gloat. I just watched from the quiet of my home office as the empire they'd built on lies burned. Quietly, cleanly, and completely. But what none of them knew was that my revenge wasn't about exposure. It was about reclaiming something far deeper. Control over my narrative. For months, I'd been painted as the obstacle, the rigid perfectionist who didn't understand business realities. But in the end, the truth was louder than any rumor. 2 weeks later, the CEO reached out privately. "We need to rebuild," he said. "Would you consider returning to lead?" I smiled, though he couldn't see it through the screen. "Only under one condition," I replied. "Full transparency, no shortcuts, no board interference." He hesitated, then nodded. "You've earned that." And just like that, I wasn't the one fired anymore. I was the one holding the keys. Rebuilding the company wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoration. When I walked back into that glass building months later, the silence in the corridors was different. It wasn't fear anymore. It was awareness. People looked up from their desks, eyes meeting mine with something I hadn't seen before. Respect. The old leadership structure was gone. Compliance wasn't tucked under finance anymore. It had its own seat at the table. My department reported directly to the CEO, and every major decision passed through transparent review. No secret sign-offs. No digital shadows. Ethan's office stood empty. The nameplate had been removed, the blinds drawn. I didn't ask where he went. Some stories end without needing an epilogue. What mattered was what came next. We began implementing a zero-exception data policy. I brought in ethical engineers, rebuilt our automation systems from scratch, and turned our internal culture around. Slowly, investor confidence began to rise again. Clients returned. But this time, the growth wasn't built on half-truths or manipulated dashboards. It was real. During a company-wide town hall, the CEO stood beside me and said, "Integrity is expensive, but losing it costs everything." She reminded us of that. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was steady, grounded, like the sound of people who finally believed in the foundation beneath them. That night, as I stood by the window overlooking the city, I thought about the irony. I hadn't set out to destroy anyone. I'd simply refused to lie. And that single decision had rewritten the company's entire future. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers through the quiet click of a door reopening. For the right person this time. Looking back, I realized revenge was never about payback. It was about balance. They fired me to silence a problem. But the truth has a way of echoing through every locked room, every hidden email, every deal built on deceit. In the end, it wasn't my anger that brought them down. It was their arrogance. The $358 million sale they chased was never real. It was a mirage built on broken principles. But the company that rose from its ashes? That one was mine. Built on transparency, resilience, and the courage to say no when everyone else said just this once. I learned that integrity doesn't always win fast, but it always wins deep. And when it does, the world sees the difference between those who fake success and those who earn it. This is revenge untold, where silence turns into power, and every truth finds its moment to speak. Don't forget to subscribe